Well, ladies and gentlemen, getting back to on an earlier video that I did, of course, pertaining to Disney's acquisition of the Star Wars license, one of the, another billion-dollar deal. Or was it a couple? I forget. But anyway, there has been some new move on this. A director has finally been announced after a lot of speculation. And, well, let's get right to it. Well, first, already earlier confirmed Michael Arndt as the screenwriter. For those of you unfamiliar with his work, you probably are somewhat familiar with his work. He wrote the screenplay for Little Miss Sunshine, Toy Story 3, and Brave. And upcoming, he is also the screenwriter on Oblivion and the upcoming Hunger Games Catching Fire. And, of course, it's going to be important to watch Oblivion for maybe clues about how his style is going to be with science fiction. Which his next two movies are, which is a good thing, because it means he's getting some science fiction experience in before writing Episode 7. Of course, the big concern is, is it going to feel like a Star Wars film? That's kind of the worry people have, is if somebody's taking over a project, are they going to make it their own? Or are they going to let go of their own personal selves and realize that they have a franchise here that has certain themes, atmospheres, and feels to them that you have to do? And you can't just hijack it to make your own. I know Hollywood people have a big problem with that. And though that is a little bit less on the screenwriter and more on the director, who has finally been announced. And then, of course, is one of the people that was widely speculated for doing it, JJ Abrams, who I guess now has reached nerd godhood, because he, not only has done his own classic series now in the form of Lost, but he's also now been the director of Star Trek and now Star Wars. So I guess that's like the ultimate fusion up there. However, that's also got people concerned, because it's always been the rivalry between Star Trek and Star Wars. But I think some people are also concerned that is Star Wars just going to be another version of Star Trek, just without Captain Kirk, his Captain Kirk and those characters. And I have a little bit more confidence in JJ Abrams than that. And for a couple reasons. I think the big one is he does have his own unique style, which is a very slick, clean style. Which, Star Wars, it was originally known as like the first lived-in universe, but I think we've had, when it comes to science fiction, everything used to be ultra clean. See Star Trek. And Star Wars went with what's called like the lived-in feel. Now, it got surpassed with that lived-in feel in Aliens and the Blade Runners and all that. So it's not as lived in as a lot of sci-fi universes. And if you look at the newer series, the prequels, it got very clean. So I think you can go either way. But here's where I get my confidence for J.J. Abrams, is if those of you that have seen Super 8. Super 8 was a callback film to Spielberg's work, and J.J. Abrams did an excellent job of capturing the feel of a Spielberg movie, and it shows me that this is a guy, he loves these kind of earlier films, he loves that Spielberg feel, that Lucas feel, all that stuff, and he's willing to just make that movie, and as he's making it, think, how would this have felt in the 80s? How would you do that style in the 80s, and make it feel really, really authentic? And if you took the CG out of that, and let's say just put like a claymation style, or even a big guy in a suit, something else, you could have seen the exact same movie being made back in 1986. And that's a good thing, because I talked about earlier about the important part with Star Wars is that style, that feel, making sure you use, that soundtrack, that Star Wars soundtrack, those Star Wars sounds, having those kind of Star Wars type shots, Star Wars type characters, moves, all that stuff. It tells me that J.J. Abrams is probably going to do a very good job at recreating that feel, that old Star Wars feel. I think he's shown himself to be able to do that, to kind of set back his own personal likes for picking up the style of the movie he's doing. And therefore I have a lot of confidence that it's actually going to feel like a Star Wars movie. That's, I think, the one thing people are a little worried about. At least with Lucas, Star Wars was his brainchild, so of course it had the Star Wars feels and atmosphere and all that stuff was Lucas's. That's what he wanted to do for his movie. And then when you take that and give it to somebody else, are they just going to have like the same paint job on a completely different piece of work? I have a feeling with Abrams at the helm, it'll be in safer hands. Now, still no confirmation on anybody else. They're still in the middle of writing the script, so I think that it still means, returning characters are going to be in flux. I am confident that there's going to be at least some returning characters from the original trilogy. Whether it be Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, those and Anthony Daniels as C-3PO. Those seem like the likelihoods. C-3PO probably the big one there. I think the easiest person to keep in, even if you don't want to put him in the suit, he can still do the voice. And plus, he's a droid, so you don't have to. He's easy to explain why he's still floating around no matter what the scenario. How big of a role any of these guys are going to be, who knows? Actually, despite Han Solo's popularity, Han Solo probably is the easiest person to drop out. You can just assume, he lived his life, retired, and had all fun. Because they are kind of throwing out all the EU, which, frankly, unless you're like the most hardcore of hardcore Star Wars fans, has gotten so overly bloated. It's really hard to keep track of anymore, and there's, it's everyone's throwing in their own personal thing. You had that whole Yagusa Vaughn situation. Even though I really loved the Star Wars Legacy comics, it didn't feel like Star Wars anymore. I mean, I like the series, and I think you can still enjoy. Let's face it, that EU stuff is still in existence. You can still read it. You can still watch it. It's not, not there anymore. It's just not going to be part of the Star Wars universe. Because let's face it, the Star Wars story got hijacked by about 40, 50 different writers since the end of the trilogy. I mean, you have like the EU period, which does somewhat, or the in between the prequel and the original trilogy, which sometimes somewhat caps on what the writers can do. It means whatever they write, it's got to end in a situation where the trilogy is still going to continue. So it does somewhat control what people can write, which makes things a little bit more, I think, better nowadays, at least overall story-wise. Of course, they still bring back Darth Maul. How many times have they brought back Darth Maul? Because now he's apparently back in in the animated series. And apparently they brought him back in the comics, only in the comics they made the implication that this was like the first time he's been back ever, so I guess that might get thrown out. And that's the problem when you have all these writers, and which is why I'm fine with him throwing out. And personally, I didn't like the direction a lot of the EU went. So it'll be interesting to see how they work with this. Again, it's going to depend. I would be Mark Hamill might just be, if he returns, he could be a main character. He could also just be almost for like an extended cameo where he's like the new Yoda of the series. Same thing. Maybe Carrie Fisher's running things, and I guess you could kind of drop her too. You don't need her, but she might be in there. Are these, it might be the same old crew back together again. Be fun to see. I mean, at least Harrison Ford, to his credit though, is still doing action movies and such, so we'll see what he does. It'll be also interesting to see, now that we have JJ Abrams as a director, will he bring back some of his usual cast members? Will we see some of the guys from Star Trek, let's say? I would love it if Karl Urban came on as some sort of character here. I mean, come on, the guy deserves it. If you're a sci-fi fan, Karl Urban has done almost a shit ton of science fiction work. He loves the genre. Karl Urban deserves to be in this. JJ, if you somehow are listening, get Karl some sort of role on Star Wars here. Also, who knows? You might see some other returning actors. I mean, that's the other thing. Lucas had not really directed much, so I think that kind of hurt him with the casting a bit. He somehow got some guys like Samuel L. Jackson, Liam Neeson, and such, but his casting later in the series just seemed like, who are? He kind of got no names a bit. He kind of brought up his own set of actors, but I think he had a problem when he was doing that. There is advantages to being an active director, and that is, of course, knowing people you can work with, knowing people you can get good performances out of and such. So I'm hoping JJ Abrams will also bring that, where he will bring in actors that he's worked with, he knows he can work with, and that'll help overall, I think. I mean, one of the big problems that people had with Lucas in the prequels is that he had a big directorial problem with it. Its performances were bad. They were real bad. And, you can lay that on Lucas. I mean, I think he had a lot of passion on the first one, but let's not forget that episodes, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were not directed by Lucas. If I were to pull up here, let's pull up Empire Strikes Back. I always forget the guy's name. Irvin Kershner. He directed Empire Strikes Back. He actually didn't have too much of a career after that, surprisingly. Looking at his list, his IMDb page here. I mean, he's Never Say Never Again, which was a Bond movie that wasn't actually. It was a Bond movie that wasn't part of the official Bond movies, but it was still officially a Bond movie. That's a discussion for a whole other day. And that's when we get the fun legal stuff. RoboCop 2, RoboCop 2 wasn't bad. I was surprised the guy did not do more work after that. And then, of course, Return of the Jedi, who was originally actually supposed to be directed by Steven Spielberg. And it was a weird thing where it was the Writers Guild didn't want Lucas to... It was a whole dispute, and because of that, Lucas got kicked out, or he left the Writers Guild. But then they got Richard Marquand to direct that movie, another British director who, again, surprisingly did not do a whole lot after that. He's got 3 other movies after he did that Star Wars film, probably because it was a last-minute thing. He had Until September, Jagged Edge, Hearts of Fire. I have not heard of any of those. Maybe Hearts of Fire I've heard of. Let's see. No, scratch that. No, I'm looking at the movie. But my point is still that, the guy has not directed a whole lot. And I think he really needed something fresh. I think he also had a bad eye for CG. I think he is an older director, and I think you have this problem with a lot of older directors, is that they don't know how to judge CG as in that's good film quality to do or not. JJ Abrams, he'll use CG, and for a movie like Star Wars, you kind of have to nowadays. But he'll also do enough with live action, with people. Hell, you even saw in Star Trek, there was a couple of those characters that were prosthetics. That little guy that was with Scotty and such. If Lucas did that, he would have done the guy as a CG character. I mean, the CG was so atrocious. When you have to CG the clone troopers, who are just guys in white armor, normal human beings in white armor, wearing face covering helmets. They're supposed to be clones, yes, but you need some CG in that to make one to show them without the mask on. But still, if they're wearing a mask, you can just get people. It would have been so much cheaper and still look better if you just had guys in the clone outfits. I don't get why he did that. So hopefully we're going to see a lot more return of practical effects. It's not, JJ Abrams is not a big, huge practical effects guy like some people are, but he will still use them, especially if he's got the budget. So there's another positive on JJ Abrams. Yeah, there are some other directors, like some people said Nolan and such. Nolan's a real big practical effects guy. He really doesn't like having to use CG unless he has to use CG, and then he has extremely high demands on those people that are making that. But compared to Lucas, JJ Abrams has a much higher level of CG requirements. So that is, I guess, it for today. It's a positive. That's my take on it. So again, we're gonna have to sit back and wait until we get a trailer or at least some screen leaks. Although, really, we're probably not gonna see anything until a trailer. JJ Abrams is one of those guys who knows how to keep stuff under wraps. Perhaps to his detriment. I think a movie like Star Wars would probably benefit much more by some set leaks and such. He doesn't like doing that, but I think in reality they actually tend to help generate buzz for a movie because they're almost so taken out of context. I mean, there's the negative side where people were complaining about Captain America when it was being filmed. because people saw what was a stunt costume for a motorcycle chase, and everyone was complaining how horrible it looked. In reality, it was just, that was for long shots, and the actual costume was not the actual costume the guy was wearing. It was a stunt costume, so it just looked alright from a distance, but if you got closer, it looked horrible because it was made more for safety. But it's hard to tell. A lot of people went, "Oh my god, it looks atrocious!" And then later on, so there is a downside, but you still get a lot of positive buzz normally, and excitement, and people keeping track of stuff when you get this. Of course, almost all leaks come from if you're doing huge outside shots, so it'll depend. I mean, if you're shooting on a stage, which, I mean, in Star Wars, even if you're doing it right, you're still doing mostly stage work. But who knows? So maybe we'll see some early leaks. Probably not, just because JJ Abrams kind of keeps things under tight wrap. Let's see here. Anything else? Nope. No idea when we'll be seeing a trailer again. Like, there hasn't been any cast done yet, and that's, like I said, JJ Abrams keeps stuff so under wraps that unless the studio really wants to let info out earlier, we're probably not going to say anything for a while on this. No script leaks or anything like that. He's got a very tight security. So that's my 2 cents. Tell me how you guys think in the comments below. Please like and subscribe and all that regular YouTube BS that everyone puts at the end of their videos. Signing off for now, guys. Bye.